So, as I said to you, I'm going to go through 5 things. So I'm going to start with the first of these, and the first of these is translations of the Quran. As Noor Fajri has mentioned to you as well, I'm currently working at the University of Freiburg. I'm part of a project which is called the Global Quran Project. And we're looking at translations of the Quran. Actually, the head of our project, Professor Johanna Pink, is particularly specialized in the Indonesian context. So usually she's the one who's giving lectures to Indonesian students rather than I. So I was going to tell her just jokingly that I'm maybe treading on her toes today by doing this. But she has written a lot about Quran translations and even tafsir translations in the Indonesian context and in various languages. But we are looking at the role of translation especially in the modern period. And so in English, we have many translations of the Quran. And there's a very important reason why I mentioned this right at the beginning. Because sometimes you find that people are talking about tafsir and they miss out the discussion about translations of the Quran. In reality, translations of the Quran are tafsirs of the Quran, right? This is maybe a very obvious point to all of you. It may not be, I don't know. But it seems to be an obvious thing that needs to be stated and needs to be emphasized because it gets overlooked. Translations are tafsirs. And that's a very heavy statement. It's a heavy statement because it means that anyone who decides that to be a translator of the Quran is in a way deciding that they are a mufassir or mufassirah of the Quran, right? At least on a certain level. So that's where my my little thing about the 3 levels becomes useful. Because a translation, for the most part, is a tafsir on just the text level, right? So just the text level. Everything that is relevant to understanding the text itself lends itself to translation. In order to translate, what I need the most is an understanding of the textual meanings of the words and sentences of the Quran. That doesn't mean that other things are not important. It doesn't mean that you don't need the context in order to translate correctly. You do need context to translate correctly. But the most that you need is the text. And as a reader, when you come to a translation, you might only find the text understanding that has at least been, the translation has been informed by context, but they might not provide you the context. You will get the page context, but you will not get maybe asbabun nuzul and things like that. So I've got some things beside me I'm going to be sort of dipping into to give you some visual aids. Unfortunately, not everything I have in physical copies, so so some things I will refer to I won't be able to hold in front of me, but I picked this as a typical translation of the Quran, a particularly popular one. This was by my own mentor and supervisor in my PhD, Professor Abdul Halim, and it has become one of, if not the most popular translation in the English language. And it has many editions, and it has digital editions as well. So this particular translation, it comes in different styles, but the one I have is a purely English copy, and it has been written sort of in paragraphs to appear in the style of how English books are written. Because for Professor Abdul Halim, one of the key principles that he stuck to was to try to make the English read as English, and not, as he says, like Arabic English, which is always criticizing when people write Arabic English. He just wants English to read in a sort of native way, in an indigenous way. But in this work, you would find very short introductions to each of the surahs. You would find very few footnotes. So he would give footnotes wherever he feels it's really necessary. And he himself drew from various sources, but as he mentions in his introduction, one of the tafsirs which was particularly important to him was the tafsir of Al-Fakhr al-Razi. Fakhruddin al-Razi was someone particularly important to him. I'm going to just pluck another example of a translation. This is not especially to say, okay, these are the two most important or the two best or anything like that. Because I work in the field of Quran translation, I'm extremely hesitant to talk about the idea of the best translation. In fact, that question, which I get a lot, I mean a lot. Yeah, people ask me this question a lot. What is the best translation of the Quran? For me, the question doesn't really make sense. I understand what a person wants to know, but it doesn't make sense to me because the level that I look at translation is each ayah, I will be looking at the meaning of the ayah according to the tafseers, and then I will look at the different translators under that ayah. So under that ayah, I might feel this one is the best. It's not always about the best and worst, but sometimes I might actually feel like I can use the word best. Or I can say these ones, 1, 2, 3, 4, have expressed the meaning that we find in the tafsirs, and various others have not. Or they have gone in different directions, which are all valid in tafsir. So that's complicated. Therefore, I don't feel possible to say one book of translation is universally the best. You know, it might be best for some ayahs and not best for other ayahs. So that's why I never answer that question. So when I'm mentioning some translations, I'm doing so just by way of example to point to certain features, right? So here is Muhammad Asad's translation, which is the message of the Quran. And the reason I brought this up is to say, well, Muhammad Asad has far more, I don't know how well you can see it, but anyway, he has far more by way of footnotes. And those footnotes are, his own observations, but he does also cite works of tafsir that he is drawing from, such as tafsir of Zamakhshari, Al-Razi, Al-Tabari, as I mentioned there just now, as I'm sort of skimming. He mentions tafsir al-Manar, which is a modern tafsir of Muhammad Abdu and Muhammad Rashid Rida. So translations with footnotes at least will give you a bit more of the pre-text or the context, right? Because the translator is then putting more in to make sure that you have a bit of information surrounding the ayah, but mostly in the pre-department, okay, in the contextual or pretextual department. A work like this in English, I don't think would give much emphasis on the post-text, okay? There could be exceptions to that, and there probably are examples of that in probably both the works that I showed you, but that is something that probably is not found in typical Quran translations, because that would be seen as something that isn't essential to the tafsir, or it would be seen as something that would take up too much space, right? And people want it to be a manageable book for people to be able to carry with them, rather than multi-volume translation. Then it would become an actual work of tafsir, which generally they're not aiming to do. So those are my general observations around the importance of Quran translations. In terms of importance, let me emphasize that people sometimes really overlook how useful Quran translations are. Sometimes when people talk about Quran translations, they talk about it as almost like a necessary evil, almost as something which, yeah, if you don't understand Arabic, then okay. In that situation, you can read translation, but of course, you're much better to read the Arabic itself. Now, there's no argument that if you can understand the Arabic itself, there is much, much more value in that. It is the actual words of Allah in Arabic, rather than an interpretation in English or whichever language. That's obvious. But what I want to say is that translations, reading translations, studying translations actually has a lot of value. First of all, because, as I've said, it is a type of tafsir. It is a level of tafsir. In fact, there are people who are native Arabs who could benefit a great deal by reading translations of the Quran. And I've had this conversation with lots of my friends where they kind of, in some cases, they assumed something about what the Quran meant because they never heard any tafsir of it. So they just misunderstood, right? So I was at one place where we were camping somewhere, and one of the brothers said, and he was from Libya originally, as it happens, not picking on any country, but he said, وَالْأَرْضَ وَضَعَهَا لِلْأَنَامِ, and he thought this meant, you know, we should sleep on the ground because the earth has been made for sleeping. So lil anam is not like lil manam, like not for sleeping. Lil anam means for the creation. He's made the earth as a place for the creation to enjoy. Wal arda wada'aha lil anam. Also, I asked one of my friends, what did he understand from the ayah? فَذَكِّرْ بِالْقُرْآنِ مَنْ يَخَافُ وَعِيدٍ, which should be translated, and remind with the Quran whoever fears wa'id. What is wa'id? It is, you know, the ya is removed from pronunciation and writing, but we have a kasra still there, wa'idi, but we don't pronounce that when we end. It's the end of Surah Qaf. So it should be, and warn, so remind with this Quran whoever fears my warning or my threat, wa'idi. But my friend who was, and to pick on another country, Egyptian, he said, remind with the Quran and repeat, wa'id, right? Which would be wa'id. So what can happen then is that if you just assume that your Arabic is fine, and you could be native Arab speaker or not, you might just make very elemental mistakes. And any translation of the Quran would have solved that, would have made it straightforward. So the fact that I, before learning Arabic, have been reading translation of the Quran means that I have a basic appreciation of all the meanings of the Quran. Basic appreciation. Very easy way of studying it. Rather than sitting down and say, well, I'm going to read Tafsir Ruh al-Ma'ani of Imam Shihab al-Din al-Alusi, and I'm going to start in the beginning and go through the Fatiha, and that will take me a year, and then I will start Surah Al-Baqarah, that will take me 10 years. You know, we need to be in a bit more of a hurry to at least get the basic surface level, and then we can build on that. We can grow from there. So all of us, if we haven't already by now read a full translation of the Quran, we should make that a top priority, to read a full translation of the Quran in whatever language that we feel comfortable to read in. And I certainly recommend to have more than one translation around, right? So have a little bit of comparison. You don't have to be studying the differences and so on. But if you're reading one translation as your main one, at least perhaps have a second one, which you can refer to if you found something in the wording unclear in the one that you're using. Look at the other one, that might clarify it for you. You'll get a great deal just by a little bit of comparison between different translations. So that's what I'll say about Quran translations for now. And if you have questions, by the way, I don't mind that you put them in the chat box. I am looking at the chat box, and I might pick up on some of those things as I talk, because, you know, it's nice to break things up with your observations as well. But otherwise, of course, at the end, it's fine.